Welcome to another episode of the Talent Transformation Podcast. Today, we're joined by Jen Shapley. Jen has 15 plus years of experience building high performing teams across the globe. She has most recently been the vice president at LinkedIn for talent acquisition, talent development, and talent management. Jen, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, Dimitri.
It's been a long time.
It has. It's been a minute.
Yeah, so the last time we were together, you were heading up talent acquisition at Express Scripts. Um, and I think at the time they were Fortune 20 maybe.
Yep.
And yeah, super fast growing at that moment.
Yeah, we were growing like wildfire back then.
Yeah, yeah. And so then you went to LinkedIn, and
Mhm.
that was, I guess, a decade. You were there for 10 years, right?
Yeah, that was a real hard turn. So, from Tennessee, so that's the Tennessee connection. But was living in St. Louis, had been there about 8 years with Express Scripts. Um, and was really interested in getting into tech. Wasn't a lot of hiring happening in the Midwest for tech at the time. But got the call from LinkedIn and thought, I'm gonna go give it a shot and move out to Silicon Valley. Didn't really plan to move to California and wasn't sure how long I would stay out here, but 10 years ago, time flies,
Yeah,
here I am.
yeah. So was it very different recruiting in Silicon Valley? Were the expectations very, very high? Was it incredibly difficult to hire technical people? Tell me that story a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a perception that it would be totally different or a lot more difficult. I would say it's different. And I think, what you know about Express Scripts and I know from being there is like it was Express Scripts was going through a hyper growth period. And so that and there was a lot of like building the plane while you're flying it. You're figuring things out for the first time. You're not following a playbook. You're writing the playbook as you're going. And so actually that experience was really, really helpful and really relevant to coming out to Silicon Valley and hiring out here. And I think when, at the time people would talk about like, oh, if you haven't been in tech or you haven't done this, you'll struggle, or there was concern around that. I think a lot of what that really came down to was like, are you able to build when there isn't a playbook to follow? And so the time at Express Scripts had been incredibly helpful for that because that was so much of what we were having to do there. The type of talent was really different. And so then you realize, you get out here and the competition for, incredible top tier technical talent, you're certainly recruiting a different profile of individual when you're talking about hiring, at LinkedIn. But I found like what was really so important and what helped with the transition was that like, can you exist and thrive in an environment where there's not like, a manual that somebody's handing you on how to do this?
Right. There's no detailed direction given to
Mhm.
you. And I think sometimes people can sort of freeze in that situation and say, oh, maybe I don't go either direction. I don't know what to do. So,
They're
but
looking for somebody to tell you what to do, and I
yeah,
think like that's
waiting.
it is truly like, and I've thought about this a lot, best idea wins. And I think like people can get frustrated with like, well, no, like I had this idea or I want to do this and like they don't know where to take it. And it's, I think what's rewarded out here really is being bold, being able to kind of like go and make things happen. And then, when people see like, oh, you made that happen and it worked really well, then kind of like the accolades come. But it requires
Yeah.
a certain level of like confidence and boldness. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So, well, Express Scripts probably prepared you for that in some ways because it was in hyper growth. It
Mhm.
was technical too. I mean, it was online prescription, so it was part of the dot com sort of evolution of business. Um, but I assume Express Scripts was large volumes of people. Like you went from thousands of people to hundreds of people, right?
Yes. And Express Scripts and it's like, the volumes, it was a different kind of game you're playing. You're having to think through at large volumes when you're hiring this many people, how many are gonna show up on their first day? Based off of that, how many do you need to have, like, going into background checks? How many do you need to be reaching out to? And so there, is a certain amount of, like, precision and strategy that goes into the funnel management when you're doing, like, volume hiring at that scale, which is different than uh, what the challenges necessarily were at LinkedIn because the volumes were different. Although the volumes at LinkedIn were ultimately, thousands of hires too, over the years. But it's a different profile of hire, it's a
Yeah.
different strategy.
Well, so certainly you weren't overhiring product designers in the anticipation that, 15% of them would not show up.
Right.
Uh, did you feel like the competition in the valley was of a different nature? The competition for the talent.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I think, there are a lot of great companies out here. People have, if you're a product manager, designer, engineer, you've got a lot of choice. And
Mhm.
so you also see a different like pattern. People move around a lot more out here
Yeah,
than you would have seen, in St. Louis, where the tenure at the organization was longer as well. And so it's not just about recruiting talent. That's certainly really important. And what are, your strategies around how you are attracting talent and but it becomes retention too. It's full on talent wars. It's not only about, like, how are you attracting folks, but then what
yeah.
are you doing to retain them in a really competitive environment?
And how much did you think about that retention at the point when you were hiring?
Quite a bit. Um, uh, and I think it's important for any talent acquisition leader not to just think of, like, one side of the equation. It shouldn't just be about, getting people and throwing them over the fence, and then kind of, going back to recruiting. While that's certainly gotta be, like, your focus, you've also gotta think long term. If you're working for a great brand, like
Yep, sure.
LinkedIn, you've gotta be cognizant of the message that you're delivering to candidates. It's gotta be authentic. It only works for so long if you're kind of, putting out a message that people don't experience once they're at the organization, and that's
Yeah.
such a huge part of retention. You need to make sure that your message is authentic and that when people come, that's how they experience the organization, and so I think, it was really important to make sure that people, um, stayed at LinkedIn, were happy at LinkedIn, 'cause otherwise that message starts to get out there, and the Valley is
Yeah,
a small place.
yeah, yeah. And so you were responsible for talent acquisition, but also a couple of other things. So, um, did that happen organically, or did you come in with more of those responsibilities from the get-go?
That happened, organically, yeah, so over the last couple of years, I'd expanded and beyond just, the TA responsibility, into talent management, talent development, and I think, it was starting to happen, at several organizations. I've seen, you've probably seen other, TA leaders kind of expand their remit and take on broader talent. I think there's been this shift, especially as organizations go from maybe like, hypergrowth periods towards, like, looking at the entire talent life cycle, having
Yeah.
folks who can look at it from the point at which you are hiring throughout the talent life cycle has become, a strategic shift a lot of organizations have made.
Yeah, well, I think also talent acquisition is just a great proving ground,
Mhm.
you know? You can get it right and you can not get it right.
Yeah.
And, you know, it also is a place where you're forced to work within the greater economy and the greater market. You can't make your market. You have to make your response to the market. And I think that that sort of drives a little more agility and flexibility in people who come from TA. I think sometimes when you've just been inside the company in a purely internal role, you have a tendency to maybe feel like you can reorganize the whole world around the way everybody agrees it will be. And, you know, to some extent, talent retention is also, about dealing with what's going on outside the company, right? The company down the street that's expanding, the brand that's getting more play in media than your brand. And those things are just real factors that I think in talent acquisition, you just get very used to dealing with those. Uh,
Yeah, there's definitely an agility and a resiliency that comes from being on the TA side. I think, like, your job is never finished on the TA side. If you're a
right.
recruiter, as soon as you fill one rack, there's 10 more, and so there's always you build up this, like, this resiliency around that. In the same way, though, on, like, the talent management and development side, the internal focused HR groups, there are longer cycles to things that you have to get used to, and how do you manage through those? And so, like,
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot I learned from working with groups that had more of that, like, kind of longer tail to what they do. I think in general, it's just good for talent leaders, HR leaders to move around and
To move
do.
around. That's what I was about to say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's where it goes. It's just good for all of us to learn more about the other pieces of the pie.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and so when you were doing talent development, um, was that driven partly because you were struggling to find the talent that you wanted or the capabilities that you needed in the organization at that particular time? I mean, was it born out of a need like, okay, we're getting these types of people, but they're not quite, they don't quite have the skill sets that we need. Um, and you started to try and move the skill sets of the organization around?
I wouldn't say there wasn't a struggle there. I wouldn't say like,
Okay.
there was like a specific need to close a gap in that way. There is was the uh kind of knowledge that in order because of how quickly things are changing, you
Mhm. Yeah.
got to invest in your own talent. You're never going to be able to it's not a healthy way to look at like your organization, your talent to think you're just gonna pull one lever. You're
Yeah.
just gonna buy talent. You're also probably not just gonna build talent because I think if you're only developing and not looking at the external markets, you're missing that like outside influence and creativity that can come from
Yeah.
bringing in new ideas. So I think like it really more of just was just a place of wanting to make sure you got a healthy balance, and we're looking at them as, like, kind of 2 different levers all in pursuit of the same strategy. How are we continuing to, like, grow and develop and invest in the talent we have, while also, like, marrying that with how are we thinking
Yeah.
about making sure that we continue to acquire best in class talent as well?
How well did you sync those 2 worlds together? You have some organizations where talent management and talent acquisition are so fully separate from each other that one
Mhm.
doesn't really inform the other, right? And then the ideal state, of course, is you know exactly what you need and you know exactly what to do to make your internal workforce able to do it and exactly what it costs to go out and find it somewhere else. And you're
Yeah.
making these decisions for each role. Okay, this role will develop, this role will hire, this role will transition through mobility with a little bit of development. But if it doesn't succeed within 6 months, then we'll hire for it. Did you have a unified top down talent strategy, or was that something you were working on?
Say we had a unified talent strategy. But I will say, like, I think that ideal state is more of a guiding light than it is like a realistic destination, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and I would imagine I think a lot of organizations are in this place right now where the future is changing so
Dramatically.
quickly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you and I, we were probably talking about this 10, 15 years ago when I was at Express Scripts, Dimitri, like the workforce plan, like once we get that like multi-year workforce plan, then all of our dreams will come true. Then we'll be
Yeah.
able to like be able to have like robust talent acquisition strategies and development, etc. And I think like ironically over the years, instead of, like, actually organizations, like, us all getting to the place of where that became a reality, it's probably become even harder to have, especially in the last couple of years, because the landscape's been changing so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
A few months can make a difference between, "Oh, yes, we need to hire these people over the next 3 years," and a question of, "Oh, is technology gonna replace that, and do we need to think totally differently?" So
Yeah.
I would say this, like, idea of, like, a unified talent strategy was certainly something that we had in place, but the reality, I think, for most organizations these days is They're still grappling with how much is technology gonna impact where we need to
Yeah.
develop, where we need to hire versus where maybe we bring in tools to help solve for some of
Well,
this.
now we're getting into artificial intelligence, right?
Yep.
And it's really hard at this very, very early stage to imagine the workforce of 2028,
Yeah.
right? I don't know, it's probably smaller,
Mhm.
unless you found a way to leverage artificial intelligence to significantly expand your business and your market share, which you could do,
Yeah.
because AI does allow you to possibly do those things too. It's also going to require a skill set that's not really been defined yet, or at least to orchestrate it inside the organization, but also just a change in every individual employee skill set, right? It's across the
Yeah.
whole board.
Yeah.
So have you been thinking a lot about that? Was LinkedIn thinking about that over the last few years? Because, ChatGPT caught a lot of people by surprise, even in the tech community, right?
What I can speak to is, um, uh, how I'm thinking about it,
Without
and I think, on this are our workforces smaller in the future? You know, possibly. I but I and kinda going down the path where you said, like, okay, unless organizations can expand, like, their portfolios and what they're offering, I ultimately can't predict the future, but I'm a big believer in, like, humans and our ability to create. Like,
Yeah,
every time there has been some kind of revolution, whether it be like industrial revolution, etcetera, like, there have been new ideas and new products that have come out of that. We're, like, so deep in the middle of such a massive shift right now. I do think it's hard to know what what new ideas may ultimately come out of this 10, 15, 20 years down the road, but I believe they will. I think a lot of the roles that we have today in our organizations are likely gonna change. In the short term, that might mean or feel like some of these roles are going away. I think in long term, it's just they're gonna be different. And so, like, what we ask of entry level and early in career, employees, what they are doing will look very different than maybe how, like, folks started their careers even a few years ago.
yeah.
Um, but I just actually think, like, humans are really adaptable, resilient, creative beings. Um,
Yeah, we like to do something. We don't sit idle.
we don't
Uh,
sit idle.
yeah. So, but now when you talk about AI and skills, and sort of the huge transition that's going to occur right now, how are you thinking about it in terms of yourself? Like, how are you approaching it? Are you thinking? Are you obviously probably reading up a lot on artificial intelligence, and we all are,
Yeah.
or we're all doing that. We're trying to keep up with what's going on. Do you think that there's going to be a fundamental rethinking of talent acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there has to be. I think, now that doesn't mean that every idea and every use of AI is a good one, and we need to challenge and, like,
True.
be thoughtful of, like, not just chasing technology for technology's sake, which I think can be a trap that a lot of us can fall into sometimes. Um
Yeah, especially with some organizations where some managers are under some high pressure to actually do something with AI, and it's kind of a vague imperative.
yeah.
And yeah,
And yeah, right, so it can feel like, "Oh, okay, I just need to show that I'm doing something with AI, um, uh, in order to, like, look like I'm, kind of meeting
modern.
that imperative, modern, exactly, that I have something to talk about on stage." But I don't think this is a moment or a point where you can't have a point of view. And so, certainly, like you said, educating myself, listening to podcasts, playing around. I think the most important thing is to, like, make sure you're experimenting with new tools. So, like, I use some form of AI every day.
Yeah.
Understanding what's possible both with, like, the silly and, like, what it can do in the serious. Um, I think, uh the most important thing I would say for folks is just, like, make sure you're playing around, you're experimenting with tools, and you're forming a point of view so that you don't get trapped in this place of, like, "Oh, I'm being told I have to use it, so I just need to go pick something off the shelf." I
Y
think, you don't w as a talent leader, I would never wanna be in the place where I feel that imperative, I feel like the pressure to be using AI, and I don't have a strong point of view on where we should be using it and where we shouldn't, because then
Right.
you're in this place where you're just feeling the pressure and like, "Okay, I gotta go do something."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
showing up to that conversation with some conviction, a point of view on like, "Hey, here's where we need to use it," whether it be like replacing the administrative, getting out of like kind of like the routine processes. What are the things that add no unique value by having our employees, our most valuable resource focused on it? Coming in with that point of view, I think gives you a lot more control in that conversation versus just feeling like I'm being told I have to use it, so I gotta stick it somewhere.
Yeah, well, I like that point about unique value, right?
The
Because everybody is going to have AI, so it's really gonna come down to unique value, to
Yeah.
what is very specific that you can do with it, that is not what everybody else has done with it. Certainly,
Yeah.
there's a certain number of things that everybody will do with it, and that will form a benchmark of maybe efficiency, productivity at
Mhm.
some level, but it won't actually cause anybody to stand out. It'll be a common denominator at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we have a certain level of AI. There'll probably be a little bit of a spectrum in terms of who deploys sooner,
Mhm.
but eventually, so there might be a little period where you have some competitive advantage just because you were a little quicker to use AI. But that will probably go away. That'll be a short-term competitive advantage. And I imagine that the long-term competitive advantage will be basically how unique are the things that you do, okay, with AI that's specific to what makes your company successful, right?
Agree. Like, I think you can't go into it and this is true with any technology, right? Like, this is true if you're implementing any kind of, like, technological solution.
Y
What is it you are trying to solve with it? And so I think,
Yeah,
like, if for organizations, if you're not clear on, like, what are you trying to deliver through your candidate experience? Are like, how are you measuring that? Is that a differentiator for you that you wanna have an incredible candidate experience? Well, that's probably gonna drive you a certain way or not as it relates to where your use of AI and making
yeah,
sure that you're using it in a way that's improving it, not just in a way that's driving efficiency.
yeah.
But being clear on that before you go and try to implement tools, I think is really important.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Um, let's just talk quickly about skills, because skills are sort of part of the AI story. Um, Companies have been struggling to make skills very useful inside their organization,
Yeah.
um, and uh, you know, part of that is probably the fact that these roles are going to be changing a lot right now,
Mhm.
and if you get the skills right, it may help you with that. But it may also make it more difficult for you to really decide what is it that you need to do a job, okay, and how do you quantify what is required for each role? I mean, have you spent a lot of time on this skills topic over the past few years?
Yeah, I have and agree. I think a lot of organizations, struggle with the like taking it from, theory into to
Practice, yeah,
reality and action and practice. Exactly. What I like right now as far as kind of how the skills movement is evolving is focusing more on the tasks of the job and getting into like, okay, what are actually the actual tasks and responsibilities that individuals
yeah,
are going to do in these roles. I think it is more tangible. It's one, it's changing a lot too. So like getting into and understanding what are the tasks of the job is just a smart place to be spending time at a
yeah.
point where more automation and AI is coming in and it's going to change the tasks that are needed. Um, but I think it is more practical in reality. I'm like,
Yeah,
then
bring it down to earth. Right.
exactly. And
Yes,
so
yes.
I think I like that migration of where it has gone because what I find that people really struggle with on the skills is the skill language can sit like really far up here and you're not getting enough into like proficiency and proficiency matters a
Right.
ton when you're talking about the roles and, like, the level of the role, etcetera, and so to just say that communication skills are needed doesn't really get to a point of being able to actually do something with it. I think
Right.
it has been really helpful in bringing some more structure to how do we interview? What do we need to focus on in the interview? What do we need to focus on developing? And so I think, like, it was a good bridge, but I like where the focus is now on actually getting into the tasks and,
Yeah, into the task, and also I would add one thing that if it's something that you're really not gonna be evaluating, it's probably not gonna be useful, right?
right.
So, yes, project management skills, only relevant if you're really measuring somebody's project management skills. Otherwise, it's just information that is not really useful, and it's kind of hard then to get it to be used,
Exactly.
because you don't actually measure it.
Yeah.
And I think so the harder skills, if you're a customer service rep, customer communication becomes really important and you're probably measuring it.
Mhm.
Okay. If you're, a programmer, your
Yep.
coding skills, they can be measured. They can be tested. They can be measured. They can be rated. They can go up and down over time.
Mhm.
So that becomes a proficiency of the
Mhm.
job. But I think you're right. I think people have sort of thrown the skills ontology on the wall, like the spaghetti on the wall. And then you look at it and there's too much information and not enough of it that is relevant and useful to what you're actually doing every day, the decisions that you're making every day. Who goes into this job?
Mhm.
Who comes out of this job in the internal? Who gets trained to be in that job or doesn't get trained to be in that job?
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think you're right. I agree on the measuring piece because certainly some skills matter more than others, and it's the ones that are like, is this a core part of the role and something that you're going to be held accountable to? And I think
yeah,
the skill piece again is ultimately about like what are the skills that are required in order to do the tasks that are a
yeah.
part of the job. And so it's still kind of it comes back there. And so but I think we probably have gotten a little too like sucked into like the hype
Yeah.
around skills without bringing it into, like, the practicality.
There's always a hype wave,
Mhm.
and managers and leaders need to recognize the hype wave and then sort of understand how to pierce that haze and get to that point where you're really doing tangible value added things. And of course, in AI, this hype
Mhm.
wave is a huge wave. It's very hard to get through it because there's a lot of people contributing to the hype, right?
Mhm.
Skills was hyped in talent acquisition and in learning, but
Mhm.
AI is being hyped across the globe by everybody, including countries, right? So it's going
Yeah.
to be harder to cut through that.
Mhm.
Silicon Valley is rolling out new AI companies basically every week right now.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you think there's more pressure on TA leaders in the Valley to use AI than in the rest of the market? Because the Valley is very, very
Mhm.
aggressive about using technology. They don't wait for the paint to dry.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think the pressure on AI is getting to a point of being fairly ubiquitous, but I do think the pressure is higher out here
Yeah,
with any
I would
kind of
think so.
tech organization. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're in a position of wanting to be able to, like, show others, um, how to do this, and so I think it is, uh, it's more at the forefront of every conversation, but I think it's getting there in most industries, but I would imagine
Well,
the pressure feels
yes,
higher
but I
here.
have discussions with a lot of companies that say, we don't want to be on the bleeding edge of this. We
Mhm,
decided as a brand, we decided as an organization, that we're going to, try and be a close second and see how things break with the EU law that's coming into effect. And if you're a very large organization, sometimes it takes time for the organization to consume all of the knowledge and then actually move out the policies that then allow the people to do things. So
mhm.
I think that, I definitely talk to some companies that say, we want to be second or third. We want to be on the podium, but we don't want to be, we're not going to try and be first. I think in the Valley, it's always, we're going to try and be number one. We're going to be first. We're going to, our credibility here in the Valley is always around, who's first.
Yeah, I think well, there's that first mover,
Yeah.
benefit, like, advantage. The first, Uh, I think it probably comes down to risk profile of the organizations too. Like, so it's just
Yes.
like as an industry, as an organization, what's your risk profile? And I think, yes, more value organizations are of the mind of like move fast and break things
Yeah.
probably than a lot of others.
Well, we'd like to have you back when you start your next thing, hear about that. Okay. It was great to see you again. It's been a decade
I
since I
know.
saw you
We'll
last.
catch up in 10 years.
We should maybe do it sooner than 10 years again.
I'll call you
But
from Mars. I'll
yeah,
probably I'll be
oh
living
yeah,
in a colony on Mars.
right. Fantastic. Listen, it's so great to see you. Thanks a lot for coming on and sharing your experiences with us, and good luck in the next thing you do.
Thank you, Smitri.